Welcome to the What If It's Not Depression Vodcast. I'm your host, Dr. Achina Stein. And it's been a while since I've done an interview because I've been traveling for quite some time, and the time zone change in France is 6 hours ahead. So it's been difficult. So I took a break in doing interviews, and coming back, my first interview is with one of my closest friends, Rajka, Dr. Rajka Milanovic-Galbraith. And she and I worked together for a number of years back at Visions Healthcare, and we've been really close friends since. Now, Dr. Rajka has done a number of things. She has a tendency, she's one of the most brilliant women I know. When she gets focused on something, she does a deep dive all through, and she knows it inside and out like the back of her hand. And if you want something solved, oh my gosh, Dr. Rajka is the person to do it. And when I'm stuck somewhere in a thing, in some kind of case, I'll always ask for her feedback, pick her brain, and she always has something to add. So just to let you know a little bit more about her, she is a leading triple board certified functional medicine doctor, international speaker, mentor to physicians, as I said, and peak performance coach. Having overcome 2 decades of debilitating fatigue, she is passionate about helping women leaders recover their edge so they can regain focus, productivity, and so they can have the highest impact in their lives. She helps them add quality years to their lives so that they live long well. And so that's going to be the topic today. Dr. Rajka has been an expert speaker in autism and nutrigenomics, in mold, illness, and toxicity. And right now, she is focusing on adding years, quality years to your life. And I would love for you to just start, Dr. Rajka, with that. And if you liked, audience, if you like this episode, please click the like button and subscribe to my channel. Welcome, Dr. Rajka.
Thank you, Achina. I mean, what a humbling introduction. The feeling is our mutual, and your listeners should know that we've had quite the history of sharing cases. And I feel the same about you, where you'll do your deep dive in your field, and I'm like, wow, how does she know that? Or you'll tell me the reversal or the improvement you got, and you're like, well, it didn't just happen overnight. And so, like, what people don't know is sometimes it's many steps, right, to help people. But I think it'd be important to start with, like, what made me segue. And you're right, and I think the drive for all of us is that we've had our own journeys. And I know you had your journey with your mom, and I as well. Now we have our own journeys, and then our patients push us. So when we can't recover them, we're looking for the next thing that would be the next tool in our toolbox. And just kind of my own aging, thinking about, I want to age well. And this past fall, my mom had been hospitalized probably the 4th time in a year. She spent 4 months, a part of, 4 months of 2022 hospitalized or in rehab.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, the past 18 months had 2 medical errors that happened that really could have cost her life.
I remember that.
Yeah, and it was pretty frightening. And here I am, a medical doctor. I can't advocate for her, but thankfully, I think the strength you and I have is we have beautiful communities and tribes of practitioners that we rely on to help get us through, and we were able to find avenues to ensure she did well. Well, I was driving, I was asked to come kind of hang out with her while my sister took a break, who does a lot of her caregiving. And she was hospitalized again. And so I was then visiting her in the nursing home, and I arrived kind of 7, 8 o'clock at night, and she just was laying in the bed, and she just looked so old. Here's the woman who worked 3 jobs to make sure that the 3 kids could have more than she did in her life as an immigrant from Serbia. And I was just so sad. I'm like, how did it come to this? This woman that was so vibrant, and I would say probably till I was about 50, really was my sounding board. Something challenging came up, and she always had the answer, just always. When I was a kid, I called it my big black bag or purse, because she worked these 3 jobs, but as a child, I didn't really realize it, because she did occasionally do that trip for school. And I'll never forget the one trip. A child cut himself. She pulls out a Band-Aid. I mean, it was just endless what she was pulling out of this person, but that's how her support was. And she's flown all over the world to see me. And I thought, Wow, this is awful. It's really hard to see that. And she's mentally all there, but physically her body has started to fail. But I do have hope. So, as you know, so I was kind of simultaneously doing the deep dive into the world of longevity and how do we age well. And we have two things. One is to obviously prevent needless suffering like we did or maybe a loved one did. But the other is to really live long well,
Mhm.
regardless if we're here 80 years, 90 years, or 100 years. And that's what really jump started this pathway on, what do we need to be doing from a lab perspective? What do we need to do from a lifestyle perspective? And what can we mitigate any of these the effects of aging? And I'm here to tell you,
Yeah.
aging is not a norm. All these symptoms of aging, forgetting your memory, having a hard time getting out of your chair, having less energy, they
Right.
don't have to be a normal part of aging. You can live long well.
Absolutely, absolutely. I know many times people say, "Oh, I must be getting old. I'm having this or that." And it's like, no, that's what we're told to believe because it's common, but it's not normal. And there's plenty of examples of people being in their 90s and skiing, or they're far and few between. I mean, there's definitely things that you can do, probably not in your 90s, but certainly in your 60s and 70s and possibly even 80s, if you take care of yourself. Yeah. Go over those symptoms. I think you said you had a whole list of symptoms that people, consider part of aging, but that doesn't have to be.
Yeah, the fatigue is probably top. And I'm here to tell you, I'm living proof that I have more energy now in my 50s than I did in my 20s because I didn't know what was at the cause of all the symptoms. And I'm going to challenge this thought that we have to all age and feel the effects of it, and not feel well. And that's the hill that I will die on. And the second would be the memory loss. You walk into a room and you forget why you walked into the room, or you misplace your keys repeatedly, or your phone, or you have trouble word or name finding. If those are happening, you need to get help now. I would not wait. And that comes from working with, as you said, I did all these deep dives. I was treating a lot of patients with full blown dementia. And it's very challenging to execute steps to improve their health because they need a caregiver. So they're not going to be able to cook the way you want them to and be on a ketogenic diet. They're not going to be able to take any of the supplements because they may not remember. And so it's really challenging. And on top of it, the further down the rabbit hole you go with symptoms, as that memory loss becomes mild cognitive decline, as it becomes dementia, it's harder and harder to reverse. It's not impossible. And there is a point where you could stop the progression, but you may not regain anything. And so I do have a couple people we've stopped the progression, but it's been very difficult to regain. But then on the flip side, we've had people that I felt could be far gone that we've reversed. But and then I'd say, even the weight gain, muscle loss, I mean, that the muscle is the currency of aging. And unfortunately, if you don't add weight starting at 40, you're going to lose muscle. And probably the biggest, I'll tell you, one big lifestyle tip is a lot of people don't eat enough protein to
Mhm.
support muscle formation. I think America as a nation is protein malnourished. And, I've had the joy of working with lots of practitioners on our team. We had a nutritionist, a dietitian, health coach, and one of my nutritionists was real adamant about this. And she's exactly right. It's a currency
Mhm.
of aging. So those are some of the symptoms
Yeah.
people, whether they know or that we're seeing, that I'll pick up when I'm meeting with them. And sometimes they don't even realize. And I'll tell you on the energy, even if you're 20, I've had plenty of 20-year-olds come in and they'll say, after they're done working with me and we transition them to what I call the longevity, the maintenance phase. So like going to the dentist twice a year, you wouldn't not see your dentist. And I say people, even at the youngest age, should probably be seen twice a year, 20
Absolutely.
and up.
Mhm.
And the sad news is if they don't, now I'm seeing people who stop seeing me and maybe it's 5 years later and you're like, wow, when did all these things crop up? Well, it's kind of like if you throw a frog in a pot of boiling water, hopefully he'll jump out. But if you put him in water to boil, he may not notice and he may die in that pot. I've had plenty of 20-year-olds say, I didn't realize I could feel this fantastic. So
Mhm.
it's this subtle acceptance of lower energy
Right.
is probably the first thing that happens as a
Right.
symptom.
Absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, and along with that protein deficit, there's also a healthy fat deficit. I mean, I think it's really important, especially if you're having, me being a psychiatrist, this is my, focus. You want to make sure that you have a healthy fats on board to support your brain and improve your mood, not just cognition, but keep your mood stable and be able to handle stressors and that does require a certain amount of nutrition. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
you're right, and I'd add the top third, the one that I'm really focused on is the diversity in the diet. So protein, fat, and I'd say diversity and diversity. If you're not eating 35 or more foods in a week, and if you never tracked, I'll challenge your listeners, write down everything you ate in this past week, all the different foods, all the different proteins, maybe different salad greens. It's
Hmm.
really hard to achieve over 35. You just have to be mindful and then not eating the same thing day in and day out. The food that is presented to the bacteria in our gut
Hmm.
gets utilized as fuel for themselves, and the byproduct of that food breakdown, and I have to laugh, I'm like, yeah, it's our bacterial poop. So
Right.
that bacterial poop is actually what the byproduct is, fuel for the human, and for
Right.
our colons, our immune system, and in your world, for our mental health. So that's why it's so important. I'd say those are probably the top three dietary things that everyone can improve on.
Right. And that byproduct being short chain fatty acids.
Yes, short chain fatty acids is the proper term, and butyrate is probably the one that we know of. And
Right.
as far as weight loss goes, if your butyrate's low, then you're going to have a harder time losing weight. So sometimes we'll add that into our as a support. So,
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's a good way to think about it, that butyrate is bacterial poop. It's a good way to explain that because it feeds your gut cells.
Mhm.
And that's why we have this synergistic relationship with the gut microbiome. It's a win-win situation, so we feed them and they feed us.
Mm.
So, absolutely. So, any other signs of aging that everyone says happens that does not need to happen?
Oh, sleep disturbances are common, and that doesn't. And when we'll look at like what are my top three
Mhm,
that contribute to poor aging, and that's going to be right up there. Sleep is number one.
mhm.
And yes, it is common, but it doesn't have to be your journey. Like there are so many ways to mitigate as our body produces less melatonin, and just from a lifestyle perspective, so many people do everything in their power to disrupt their own circadian rhythms with all the blue light exposure. And I laugh, I say our dog probably saved our circadian rhythm because, you take them outside to walk every morning, and getting the
Right,
morning light, going to bed at the same time and getting up about the same time, and avoiding blue light at night. And I'd sneak in a fourth of turning the Wi-Fi off.
right,
I had one patient tell me, so we put her on gentle supplementation to restore her sleep. And about the third visit in, second or third, she says, I stopped that supplement because I found turning off my Wi Fi did the same thing. And
right.
there's a genetic, because I love the genetics, there is a genetic variation that makes people more susceptible. So, another
Mhm.
tip, so we've asked your listeners, can they eat more than 35 foods in a week? But another tip is turn off your Wi-Fi at night for a week. And if you're sleeping better, then you're probably one of those sensitive people. Then go get, a little plug-in for your router, and have it go off from 11 to 7, or whenever you're bed, 10 to 6
Right.
or whatever.
Believe it or not, that's what we did today. We actually moved the router out of my office because I was literally 3 feet away from it and put it downstairs as far away as possible from us. And we're gonna turn it off at night. So yeah, it's definitely something that affects people and something that people just don't realize how much they're surrounded by electromagnetic frequency waves and radio frequencies and Bluetooth. All of these things can affect you, especially if you're sensitive. I actually had used to wear a Fitbit, and because it started causing some warmth around my wrist, I took them off. I took it off, and I don't use it anymore. So I think it's important to keep in mind that that is a possibility, and it's important to do a sort of a review of what the EMFs, what EMFs you're exposing yourself to, and the quantity, and the amount of exposure that you have day to day.
Mhm.
It's a good
Yeah.
point. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd love to start if it's okay with kind of the one test I ran on
Mhm.
myself that really, as I was learning
Yeah.
ways to mitigate, because that will, I think, help listeners. And I'll talk about some other tests you can do that maybe aren't as
Sure.
pricey or that might be more cost effective. But there are companies out there. About 3 or 4 years ago, there was only one. So there's a true
Mhm.
age test. It's one of at least a few now that looks at markers of aging. So just with a simple little
Mhm.
pinprick to your finger, you blot on a little card and send in, they can determine the following three things that I think are
Mhm.
important, and we'll go over each one and things we can do. First is something called our biologic age. So
Mhm.
how old are you internally versus your chronologic age? Your birth date will give you your
Mhm.
chronologic age. And that is dictated by all those things in our lives, that we're exposed to. And I alluded to sleep is a huge one, probably
Mhm.
number one, the effects of stress, and then
Mhm.
exposures to toxins. So any toxin, it could be mold, like, I'm well
Mhm.
versed in, or it could be pollution. Alcohol's a toxin. So
Mhm.
smoking
Absolutely.
cigarettes, I mean, those are the 4 things that are going to really age you. And so that's going to affect that chronologic age. The
Mhm.
second thing that you can measure is how fast are you aging? Is it 1 year per 1 year? So you really want to be aging less than 1 year per 1 year. So, and I'll go over some of my results and what we can do with all of this
Mhm.
information. And then the third was looked at your immune age. And so, how old is your immune system? And you
Ah.
definitely want it to be younger. And you want to actually, they look at a ratio of two of our cells in our body called CD4 and CD8, and
Mhm.
they look at the ratio of CD4 to CD8. You want that number to be between 1 and 4. And
Mhm.
so let's go over some of the data on each one, if that's okay.
Yeah. Can I ask you a question first?
Yeah.
Does this is this looking at the length of the telomeres? Is
That's also in there, and I think that's important, but what's interesting to know, so you're gonna have listeners that are probably more switched on and are already familiar with telomeres, but that alone is not enough. So it does also measure telomere length, and
good.
that's the end caps of our genes, and they
Mhm.
shorten as we age. So you're right, but I'm gonna focus on the top three. Is that okay?
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, so I think in combination, it's probably a more powerful test than just telomeres alone. So it does include that.
It does
Um,
include it. Okay, that's what I wanted to know. Yeah.
yeah, it includes it. And so here's the data. If your biologic age is less than 7 years, so say you are 57 years old
Mhm.
and you're measuring at 49.5 years biologically, you
Mhm.
can reduce the risk of dying. So we call that the mortality rate by 50% by
Mm.
reverse aging. And so we're going to talk to in a little bit, like, what are these things we can do?
Mhm.
On the converse side, if you're 8 years older than your chronologic age, you have 100% increased risk of mortality.
Wow.
Terrible, right? You don't want to be,
Wow.
and they're finding that it also equates to quality of life. So you never want to live longer without the quality of life. And that's where we say your health span needs to equal your lifespan. So quality equals is present throughout your life. Um, Now, what would kind of affect that? So we'd said sleep, stress, alcohol. But as a benchmark, I'm happy to share with reader or the listeners is that I'm 4 years older, but I have other salient things. And you think about what I've been through: sleep
Mm.
deprivation in med school, residency. I delivered babies for 5 years. The
Mhm.
stress was high in training. After we got out, you could mitigate that better. And then I've learned how to do that better and better. So my goal now is to, lower that by 11 years, because of course I want that good outcome.
Mhm.
And so it's, getting good sleep at night, learning how to regulate your stress. So no one can change what we're exposed to, but we can teach ourselves how to be out of fight or flight. Box breathing is one of them. There's so many inexpensive modalities. I use heart math with all my patients. So
Mhm.
we can say tangibly they're out of fight or flight. And then limiting exposure to toxins. Those would be really simple things. And what we'll get into is the peptides and the bioregulators. So we're going to save that for the end, and I'll explain that more because people have to know there's always more than one way to treat something.
Oh, absolutely. We got a pretty wide tool bag here to go from other than medications,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. Rate of aging. We both, my husband and I, were zero point 0.9 years for every 1 year. So we were aging slower than 1 year per 1 year. And that's what you want. And we're going to try to improve upon that.
Mhm.
And that really looks at, because the test can be repeated every 6 months, is, well, 3 to 6 months, is you can influence that pretty quickly. So it means whatever we were doing the 3 to 6 months prior to the test, we are on the right track. So
Mhm.
yes, historically, there was some things that made me perhaps age a little quicker, but now I'm reverse aging. And I
Mhm.
have to share something that's so funny. So I told my daughter this and I said, Daddy and I are reverse aging. And she's like, no, you're not. You know how adolescents can be. And she said, you're just aging slower. But at least she's listening, right? So she
Right, she's
knows.
listening.
Which was funny. And so, you think about just in general, what could someone do? Diet, lifestyle is all the things we already mentioned with sleep, stress, toxin avoidance, but they found that caloric restriction. So I'm going to say this really carefully because everyone's in a different place. I'm not talking stop eating or whatever, but even reducing calories by 10 to
Mhm.
11%, you
Right.
can slow that rate of aging. And think about it. So eat till you're 80% or 90% full.
Right.
And that's why I always say I like to think of a diet as the nourishing, we call it the abundant diet 365 in our clinic. So
Uh-huh.
eventually that's the goal, to get everyone on a nourishing diet that's right for their genetic makeup and for their metabolism, et cetera.
Right.
So yeah, so I'll have to keep you posted on whether I've reversed that or lowered that pace of
Right.
aging even further.
Well, intermittent fasting is supposed to
Mhm.
help with that as well, right?
Yep.
So once you're on the nourishing diet, please do not intermittent fast until you're actually eating the right foods, right? Audience, but you want to make sure you're getting on a good, healthy diet and then adding in the intermittent fasting, so that you know that your blood sugars are stable. So what's next?
What's next? Can I just make a comment on another? We've created an acronym for how to
Sure.
eat healthy.
Uh-huh.
And I think that a lot of us in functional medicine mean well when we do the elimination diets or tell people to intermittent fast. But you're right, if you're not even nourishing the body, you can get into a whole world of hurt. So we've
Absolutely.
created the task method. So I'm going to put you
Mhm.
to the task to get to that abundant diet. And the first steps are track for T, A
Mhm.
for add. We have everyone live at T and A just for a short while to know where they should be. And
Mhm.
only then do we subtract. So if you're not nourishing the body and we take away the garbage, then you could be eating nothing, or I don't know, maybe gluten-free crackers,
Yeah.
who knows? But so that's what we do in the clinic, is we get people nourishing their
And
bodies
and
first.
what's the K?
K is keep. So when you reintroduce, and
Uh-huh.
this is where people get it wrong. So we're well-meaning when we tell people to eliminate things, and particularly healthy foods that might be affecting them. But if you don't put it back in, you could end up on that restricted diet. And
Right.
as we said earlier, it's going to lower those short chain fatty acids and can induce more food sensitivities. It can induce increase in your mental health symptoms. So you got to be really, really careful to not be on those restrictive diets for too long, and it's well supported. So
Right. Right.
yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So task is to track,
Mhm.
act, subtract, and keep.
The A is add. I'll add all the things
Add.
that
Oh,
goes to
okay.
add.
Add,
So
not
that
act.
would
Okay.
be, so we have them add in the right amount of macros for them. We have them add in fiber, add in servings of veggies, colors of the rainbow, good fats. I talk about the balance plate,
Right.
and then diversity and rotating their food. So those are kind of among the things we're having them track.
Awesome. I love that acronym. It's very easy to remember.
Well, since you're my friend, you can definitely use it. Yeah. And so that last measure we're going to talk about, and I didn't mean to kind of ignore telomere length, but that got a lot of press. But the immunologic age,
Hmm.
and remember I said that CD4 to CD8 ratio needs to be between 2 and 4.
Hmm.
And what can we do in diet lifestyle to maintain that ratio and immune health? And one is keeping your vitamin D levels up at 50. So at
Right.
least 50
At least
is
50.
yeah, so that's the top thing, and,
Hmm.
I'm just really baffled that 3 years have gone by now, and I don't think people are looking at vitamin D levels unless they're seeking functional care. It's not being done or it's not being replaced and
Right.
that should be not only for immune health, but, just, just in general health because it's a
Absolutely.
hormone.
And it's not being paid for by insurances when family doctors want to include it in a panel, So you're absolutely right. It's not. And, the research shows that you want to have your vitamin D closer to 80 if you have an autoimmune process going on in the body. And it doesn't have to be an illness. It has to be, it can be a process where you have antibodies to tissues, but not a full blown and autoimmune disease. And that will
Yeah.
actually reverse things if you actually get those things in place, right?
Yeah. So the fun tidbit there is that there are no centenarians, so no 100-year-olds who have a CD4 to 8 ratio less than 1.0. So that's why it's important. And I know the audience may be thinking, well, I don't want to live till 100 anyway, but I'm like, my goal is to live you to have you live as long as you're meant to live and have that quality of
Mhm.
life.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
Absolutely.
so if you retire, you can actually enjoy those years. And I can't tell you back in the day, I had an 80-year-old professional male come. I was practicing outside of Seattle, Washington, and Everett, and he was just such an elegant man, a public figure for the town of Everett. And he said, "Doc, those golden years aren't so golden." And he had hit 80 and was really feeling it. And now, sadly, I'm like, gosh, I wish I would have known, 26 years ago what I know now. I probably
Right.
could have helped things along a little bit.
Right. Right.
But
Absolutely.
yeah, so it's important. There are several blood tests you can do. One is serum albumin. So typically
Mhm.
it's on a metabolic panel. So that's usually covered by insurance. And they found that in people who were readmitted to the hospital, they had worse outcome and higher rate of mortality and dying if that level was under 3.5. It's
Mm.
really a marker of how we're absorbing protein. And if it's abnormal can suggest liver or kidney disease, but that's a simple blood marker. So everyone has ever had a metabolic panel, go look. You should be over
Mhm.
4.5. And if you're not, let's figure out why. Is there an underlying disease process? Are you not getting enough protein? Are you not digesting the protein you eat?
Right, right. And you need that protein for so many things, not just muscle mass, as you mentioned before, but even to carry around hormones, right? So yeah, serum albumin is on a comprehensive metabolic panel that most doctors do on an annual basis, including your primary care provider, along with the CBC and potentially a TSH, liver functions, things like that. It's very common test and many doctors order it as part of the comprehensive metabolic panel, but they don't really talk about it with their patients, right? They talk about electrolytes and kidney function and liver function, but it's actually squeezed in there right in between, right?
Yep. Yep. And they don't make reference to it. And I don't think we were really, unless it was out of range.
Right.
So to make reference to it.
Yeah.
And I have a whole video series on YouTube that says the words you should never hear your doctor say, and it's your labs are normal. Because I can always find subtle things that would really lead to large benefits if you corrected them. But first you have to know about them, right?
Yes. I agree. Yeah, I do the same thing. There's so many things on a CBC that you can tell that most doctors don't really talk about and break down for the patient when you see them.
Yeah.
So I always like to get labs from previous providers before I even meet with a person, just to get a sort of a screen of, so it is helpful. And then when you get your own labs, then you can compare and see, if things gotten worse or better over time. So it's very helpful to even get those labs that are done prior to seeing them.
Yeah. Yeah, I would love to talk about, so we miss out a lot about not talking about these subtle innuendos on labs, which really, if you pay attention,
Mhm.
and kind of reverse the process. And a lot of the other thing for your listeners to look at in the labs is, where are those liver enzymes, the ALT and AST, and they should be 15s and 20s. And if the upper limit is 40, you should not be at 30, 35, or 39. I mean, and what
Mhm.
we're seeing is an explosion of fatty liver, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And 20% of those people will go on to cirrhosis, can go on to
Mhm.
cirrhosis. And that's not a good place to be. So it should be taken seriously, and I've seen it down in children as young as 9.
Mm.
So,
Mhm.
and that's all the carbs that they're eating. It's the lack of nutrients. It's the lack of protein to break down any toxic exposure. Because you had said protein is important for
Yeah.
muscle and all
Right.
this stuff, but it's also the breakdown products of protein, which we're going to jump into next, are
Yeah.
amino acids, and that's what peptides are. So they're
Right.
amino acids, and I'd love to kind of talk about how did they come about, and then the two parts of our body that are also overlooked when we go through medical training and a lot of people don't talk about, if
Uh-huh.
that's okay. So,
Absolutely. Yeah, we wanted to dive into that as well. I just want to back up a little bit because you did mention a test that tests for those three things, and that test is called. I don't think you mentioned the name. I
oh,
think,
it's called
right?
True
Right.
Age by a company called True Age Diagnostic.
Right.
And, you can buy direct from the company. So,
Hmm.
it's a little bit more expense, but an expense that I think is worth it. So I hope everyone else who's listening also, deems it valuable to invest in their health. And I'll tell you, not a scare tactic, but, I've treated so many people who are unwell, and, especially, the man who doesn't have his health only wishes for one thing, and
Hmm.
it's their health. And it's
Right.
not a good place to be in. I've had people confide and say, if I had kept feeling this way, I would have ended things. And,
Hmm.
like, well, thank goodness we've done something about it.
Right, right. Well,
Yeah.
a lot of times, people reach their 30s and 40s and 50s, and they think about their parents and what they went through. And, the strongest indicator of your age is really your parents' age and when they pass. But that doesn't mean to say that it's going to be for you as well, because it's epigenetics and not genetics that you have control over, and that's lifestyle changes. So you can change the epigenetics, turning off the bad genes and turning on the good genes. And that's where that reversal comes in. And you could potentially live longer than your parents, and have a better quality of life. I know for me, with my mom passed away when she was 63. I was 26 years old when she died. And I am now going to be 60 this year. And so I think, oh my gosh, if I was exactly the same as her, I've got 3 years left. But she was extremely ill. And I have family members who, are in their mid 70s, and mid to late 70s. And so I know that there's a lot of potential for me, but it's really important, and it's definitely top of my mind to really do exactly what you're saying. Exactly what you're saying. So it's coming at a good time for me as well to talk about these things. But this is not just physical health; it's also mental health. So whatever you're doing to improve your physical health in the way that Dr. Reich is talking about, this will absolutely translate to better mental health and a better brain, right?
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And I'll probably reference some of the peptides. And again, I'm going to try to stick to where the studies are too. But when I kind of did a deep dive, like, where do they even come from? So if
Start
we
with that.
remember Pavlov, the
Mhm.
scientist who won the Nobel Prize back in 1904. So we had an inkling. He was actually, when he did the study with the dogs and the salivation, he was studying digestion. Okay,
Mhm.
so just to simply put it, and they were more specific. And he found something called the propeptide. So it's the precursor to BPC, which is body protection compound, which is an oral peptide that it can be given orally or injected, and it does exactly what it says. It helps protect our body. and can heal a leaky gut. So there's a role, and I'm starting to use it in people who are not recovering. Think of people with SIBO or just recurrent. We can't get rid of that dysbiosis no matter how hard we try. People reacting to lots of food. So it's an adjunct I'm adding, and post-operatively, so people recover quicker. So oral and or injectable. When I say injectable, many of them are just below the tissue or the skin level, so subcutaneously. Um,
Mhm.
but yeah, so that was developed, and I don't know. I don't think it was until 1970.
Mhm.
There's a Dr. Cavison out of Russia was granted a lot of money by the government to study and reverse the ill effects of the military, particularly those going underneath in submarine for months at a time. So they were suffering muscle loss and a lot of ailments. And to date, he's done studies on millions of people. And the
Mhm.
side effects. Here's the thing with peptides: they help improve the way the cell function.
Mm.
They're they're very limited side effects. So you're
Mhm.
going to get all the benefit with very limited to
Mhm.
no side effects from them. And so it's like, it's kind of a no-brainer for me. But again, anything we say here, we say is not medical advice. Please consult your practitioner, because
Right.
we have not looked at any one person's medical history to know what they're on and what they're taking. But so I was just super impressed. And now think of it, peptides for recovery. And so a lot of
Right.
people will say I'm working out, but it takes me longer and longer to recover. Do you remember when we were teens? We may not have. I was a big runner. I wouldn't run for a week. I could just jump and put my shoes on. I'd run and I'd have no
Yep.
problems. If I did that now, waited weeks and weeks and went to working out, I'd probably be a little bit more sore these days. But actually, not now. Knowing what I know and what we've done with peptides in myself and my current patients, but the Russians now use it for recovery for the Olympic athletes,
Cool.
and they have some great data. Um, and so I'd love to segue into the two glands or the two body parts that aren't talked about and why they're important and how some of the peptides can support them.
Mhm.
And so we talked about that CD4 to CD8 ratio. So that's our
Right.
our immune age. But the thymus gland, sits behind the breastbone. What do you remember from medical school, if anything, about it?
That it has to do with our immune system. That's
That's
about
it.
it.
That's
Right.
it. Yeah. Yes. So it is really important for immune function. And you're right, we weren't taught much else about it. But what's interesting is the thymus gland does make one of our blood cells called lymphocytes, protects us against infection. But sadly, in puberty, it starts to involute and it starts getting replaced by fat. And it requires a lot of our body's energy. So think about kind of evolution. So and then it fully involutes about the time you're 25 or so. So it's still,
Mhm.
you still got some function from it. But why that is because then you're childbearing. So the body was really to reproduce. And then it's like after we reproduce, we're done with you, right? So that we can propagate the ongoing species. So, but yeah, the thymus gland, as it feels, like I said, if that CD4, CD8 drops below 1, then, it correlates with longevity. And so I wish I would have known, wow, that's fascinating. Believe it or not, there are peptides that can support the function. And I'd like to highlight one study as soon as I talk about the other body part. But
Mhm.
yeah, I'm like, God, I don't remember learning much else. And now it's like so important, right?
Uh-huh.
Um, yeah, the other neat factoid, the thymus gland, um, the impact of, actually not with the thymus gland, sorry, about the pineal gland. So we're going to talk about the pineal gland. So it's no bigger
Uh-huh.
than like a soybean. It's part of our brain and it's super important for regulating our circadian rhythm. So remember, I
Mhm.
said that's huge in
Right.
longevity. And the pineal gland, so the thymus gland gets replaced by fat, but the pineal gland can become calcified.
Mm.
And then the calcification or the higher levels of calcification is associated with your neurodegenerative diseases. So think about Alzheimer's.
Right.
And so more than just the circadian rhythm, it also kind of bathes the stem cells that are in our ventricles, and
Mm.
stem cells for your listeners, and you had alluded to, when you're intermittent fast, we boost, especially if you're doing prolonged times, we can boost stem cell formation, particularly if you're getting into that 3 to 5 day range. We'll talk about how to do that safely. So I discovered a way that makes a
Yeah.
little less difference. So thymus gland, pineal gland, and that kind of again, I don't really remember much about the pineal gland except for that general description, but why is it important, right? So calcified, believe it or not, the calcifications are increased by fluoride. So I don't know about you, but my dad started following more natural medicine when we were in our teens. And he'd always be yelling, "Don't talk when you're brushing your teeth," because we'd be brushing our teeth and giggling and being obnoxious. "Don't swallow the fluoride." Well, he was right. And so, and to be honest, it doesn't really even decrease cavities. So we don't, as you know, we don't utilize, we haven't used fluoride since I've
In
been
years.
here.
Same here. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And in a perfect world, you'd filter it out of your drinking water and make sure you didn't have it. So, and I'm just cringing because they used to sell water for babies with fluoride in it.
Fluoride. No, I
Gallons of water. And I'm pretty certain I
don't.
kicked my son. Maybe he'll forgive me. But so those are the two glands that really play a role in, or parts of our body that don't get a lot of press, and
Right.
maybe as sexy as our muscles, but at any rate, that are important. So they did a study. So Cavison did a study, and he had two groups of patients, and we're not talking young patients. So this is why everyone should be listening, because even if
Mhm.
you're in advanced age, so they had two groups, and what they did was first group was 60 to 74-year-olds. So those are not, although I shouldn't say 60, Achina, because you're approaching, say you're 60. But they were treated with 6 courses of the pineal peptide, epitalamin. So 6 courses over 3 years, and then they followed them for 12 years. So
Mhm.
if you were 74, they followed you to 86, and they
Mm.
found there was a 50% reduction in
Mhm.
mortality. And that was
Mm.
just 6 courses. So that is huge. And that is it's a published study. This is not anecdotal. I'm,
Right.
saying this is what
6
we're
courses of what?
epitalon. And
Epithalon.
it's
Okay.
a pineal peptide, and peptides
Mhm.
are just short chains of amino acid that help improve cell function. In this case, help support the function of our pineal gland as
Cool.
we age. So, and then what they did was they had a second study that they did, and that looked at 75 to 89-year-olds. So this is where
Mm.
my mom falls in. So she'll be,
Mhm.
I think about that, she'll be 85 this year.
Mhm.
And same thing, they gave the control group a multivitamin, and they had 2 treatment groups. The first one just gave them the pineal peptide, the epithalamic,
Mhm.
and they found in that age range, and they only followed them for 6 years, as you can imagine,
Mhm.
75 to 89, they may not be around as long. Just with that one peptide, they had a decrease in mortality of 36%. So
Mhm.
not as good. But then they had a second arm to the study, and they added that thymus peptide, and they
Mm.
were able to decrease that mortality another 12%. So that's a 48% reduction. So almost as good as the younger
Wow.
elderly
So when you
population.
say course, how often are these courses?
Every 6 months. And
Mhm.
so they're doing days. Typically, it's 10 days every 6 months.
Mhm.
So that's not even, if you're not going to do anything, that's where I'd be looking at. Just do that.
Right.
Some good data around decreasing worsening outcome for
Mm.
cardiovascular disease. So, yeah, just to
Mhm.
understand that the biggest thing to understand is there's a way to test for aging. There's a way to implement diet, lifestyle changes, our epigenetics to
Mhm.
counteract for aging, and then there's additional things that can be done. And
Mhm.
so, you better bet your bottom dollar. I'm going to have this discussion with my mom, like, hey, we need
Mhm.
to get you on some of these peptides, and they have 2 different categories. They're both really amino acids, but one are called the bioregulators, and that's what Cavison out of Russia is using more of. And then the more traditional peptides that are available in the U.S.
Mhm.
That's not to say the Russians do. There are pharmacies that do
Yeah.
deliver them. But yeah, so I wanted to focus on, what is in the studies, what could you use, and what could the benefit be so you don't age poorly.
Right. Right. Awesome. That's
Yeah.
great. And so what is the difference between bioregulators and peptides?
Yeah, not much. It's real subtle. So they're both
Mhm,
bioregulators. They do the same thing, and they're most of those are oral, most, not all. So they have
mhm,
injectable. Whereas peptides available here in the US, besides BPC, most of those are injectable, just under
mhm,
the skin.
mhm.
So,
Great.
and you
That's
know what? I would
awesome.
also say clinically, I would add the bioregulators are subtle
Mhm,
versus some of the peptides I've been using, you're going to see a quicker effect. And
mhm,
so there's been a handful I've been using in myself and patients and my husband
mhm,
that I'm just like, as far as I'm concerned, unless you have something contradictory in your history, remember we said there's limited side effects. So there are peptides that support the release of our growth hormone. So it's not growth hormone, which is illegal in the US unless you have a specific medical condition that warrants it. So a
mhm,
true deficiency. So there are children that don't have it, et cetera, true deficiency. But you can give peptides that will support the production of growth hormone, which then goes on to support the production of your sex hormones. And so what also falls as we age is all of our sex hormones decline.
right.
And the difference between giving some of the peptides to promote the formation of growth hormone, there's one that
Mhm,
will promote the formation of it, one that will then help, so it like fills a gas tank, and then one that empties it out. So there's one
mhm,
that helps release the growth hormone, is that you can start it, get the benefits, and you can go off without consequence. But think
mhm,
about hormones. If we give hormones, what happens? So all of a sudden you've got a lot of, say, estrogen on board.
mhm.
Well, our receptors go down.
Right.
And so say you stop that estrogen or testosterone, well, the body takes a little while to acclimate. So you probably shouldn't stop it immediately, whereas the peptides you can go on and
Oh,
off.
that's good to
Um,
know. That's
and
really
it,
good to know.
yeah, benefits that I've seen in patients and myself is that improves for the ones that help release growth hormone or
Mhm,
make it and then release it are that increased recovery from
mhm,
exercise. And
mhm.
one of the things you notice is I'm like, I'm exercising a decent amount without over exercising. Another thing that people tend to do is they
Right.
stress their bodies more. And believe it or not, all the Ironmans out there, I mean, that really decreases longevity. So someone who's training at that level, they need to really look at some of the numbers. And
Yeah. They have to look at how much time they're allowing for themselves to recover, not really giving their bodies a chance to recover. And then when you're stressing it again before that full recovery, that's where the problem is. So,
that's right. That's
gotta
right.
listen to your body, guys.
Yeah, gotta listen. And so leaning out a little bit. So as we've worked out, noticing that all these efforts we're making, wow, this is fantastic. Increase in libido and just
Mhm.
it promotes better sleep. So these are supportive things I'm seeing clinically
That's
in
awesome.
patients. And so that would be something that, maybe a go-to to reach for first
Mhm.
when you've reviewed what their clinical history is. So if you're stressed out, so if your cortisol is really high, you can retain a little weight with that. So again, if someone's looking for weight loss and you're dosing it multiple times a day, yeah, you're increasing lean body mass, but they may not like that side effect of now they're all swollen and bloated. So less is probably better, and then mitigating, teaching people how to mitigate that stress, supporting the adrenal glands the way we know how in functional
Right.
medicine.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a package. The whole approach is a package of things and not just like a silver bullet. It's really important to look at the whole
Mhm.
all of the things that you can do and doing them together. And that's the tough part, getting that started, habit stacking with lifestyle changes, and then adding these things on board at the right time.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I would say you're exactly right, because if you're depleting nutrients, these peptides don't work as well.
Right.
So there's this, and probably both you and I look at targeting. How do we make someone feel better? From my standpoint, typically it's more physical
Hmm.
unwellness, and your standpoint might be mental unwellness. And
Hmm.
until you hit that, you might not be able to get them to have the energy or the mental capacity to say, I can take and put one more thing on my plate buy 35 different foods or to meal prep on a weekend. So I always try to get people recovered as quick as possible.
Hmm.
We typically see about 50% improvement in symptoms in about 4 to 6 weeks, and then we hit them hard with lifestyle.
Right.
And, and then our coaches, I know you have a coach too, comes in and supports them. And I've been doing a lot of training on behavioral change, and
Hmm.
we're going to be changing how we do that too to make sure
Hmm.
that everyone is supported, and they're giving strategies to how do we implement change that's sustainable. So.
Right, right. Yeah, awesome. Wow, we came full circle. And I think, you really covered all of the pieces of the puzzle that, you can utilize in order to reverse aging on some level and feeling better and having that quality of life
Mhm.
along with a longer life. And so that combination is really, really important. So thank you so much. Tons of information as always. You always do a lot of research, and the details of studies that support it, and you share that with us today. And great tools, great suggestions of things to look at and do right away. Those 35 foods, that's
Yeah.
something you can actually do right away. And get the test and see where you get some data. It's important to get some data and hopefully find a person who can do peptide therapy. That is something that I am exploring. And, you were the first person that I knew, close by, that does them. And it's great to see that you're experiencing good results. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's going to be my next step in having that as part of my tool bag and helping people recover from illness and get into a space of wellness and longevity. Awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. Can I just one more thing so the viewers know? We mentioned just a few peptides. There's a whole army. I mean,
Yes.
70 plus. And, I'm rethinking how I think about even just immune dysfunction. So it's the
Mhm.
immune dysfunction that leads to mitochondrial dysfunction, and that's what
Right.
propagates it. And I thought it was the other way around. And so I'm starting to use these in the long haulers as well. Um,
Right.
so there's a way to support the immune system when it feels like you just can't get them. They're doing all the right things better. And but my favorite, can I mention my favorite
Of
peptide?
course you can. Yeah.
So yes, of course, we love the growth hormone releasing ones, but I really love MOTS-C, MOTS-C. It's the mitochondrial peptide, and I always tell people like that is like just gold
Mm.
in how I've felt in recovery. And so that's typically dosed up to 3 times a week. So it is injectable, but I'll inject and then go work out later. And it's like, wow, it just packs a punch. And I'm like, and I already feel well. And then of course you get someone down to a maintenance dose of that. But that's, it's the immune dysfunction, mitochondrial dysfunction too, that
Awesome.
gets us into troubles. But yeah, I just wanted to close with that one.
Oh, awesome. Always so much information. I love just talking about all of these things with you. And no matter what the topic, you have so much to add. And so I'm really glad we did a deep dive on anti-aging and specifically this testing, the true age testing and the peptides. Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with my audience. And I'm sure they're all gonna want to now do the testing. So I better get an account and get myself started.
I'm here to
Uh,
help you if you need, but I know that you're really good once you just get that whiff of the information. It's like a wildfire, right? It
yes,
really
I'm a sponge, absolutely. Yeah, usually Dr. Rajka gets started and I just follow because she always has these great ideas. She's an incredible functional medicine doctor based out in Naperville, Illinois. And why don't you tell us how people can find you?
So yeah, we just moved the clinic from Naperville to Oakbrook Terrace. So we're a little centrally located because we do have people fly in to see us. So we're a
Mhm.
little closer to the airport. And the website is drrajka.com, just drrajka.com. And I promise I'm getting so much better on, I think it's super important to get this word out, doing Instagram Reels. That's been my newest thing. So that's the Instagram handles at DRRAJKA, so my first name, as is the Facebook page. So I love doing the lives. I'm getting really more adept at the Reels. I have a young adult son who's giving me feedback on how to make it watch worthy. So look out, world, right?
Well, you're fortunate because none of my kids are on Instagram or TikTok or Twitter. They don't do any of those things. So
My
funny.
my kids are they watch. They're voyeurs. They don't do, and that's but my son is actually, I don't know why, he gives me really good constructive feedback. And he said, "People are bored." I said, "Do you mean I have to dance now?" He said, "Yeah, you might have to dance. So watch out."
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm gonna have to check those out. I have watched a couple of your videos and I think they're very educational. Yeah,
Yeah. Thank you.
awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you so much. I know you have a very busy day. Thank you for your time. And we'll have to touch base in the future. We talk every week, so I'm just letting you. I was like, here I am. Like this, you're one of my best friends. So, thank you for your time and sharing all your knowledge. And I love you. Take care.
I love you too. Thank you for having me.